Welcome to the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. You're listening to a new episode of the Leadership Student Podcast with MK Palmore. We are all lifelong learners, and nowhere is this more relevant than in the practice of leadership. Our goal is continual learning and improvement. Let's get after it. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Okay, folks, here we go. This is MK Palmore. Welcome to this episode of the Leadership Student with MK Palmore. Today in the virtual studio, I'm joined by Adrian Koehler, who's a eminent leadership coach, been in the industry for a number of years here and had some great experiences. Adrian, welcome to the virtual stage.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me, MK.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. Adrian,
Of
tell us a
course,
little
man.
bit about your background and how you ended up in the leadership coaching space.
Sure. So I've been a coach and a trainer like this for about 13 years. Didn't get here in a straight line. Usually, when I tell people my story, they're like, "How many lives have you lived?" Because I was like a medical student in college, and I thought, "Oh, I'll go be a doctor," just because I didn't know what else to think about, and my brain works around that stuff, and I'm interested in it. But then I realized I don't want to actually do that. I don't want to go to medical school and spend the 7 years. I'm just not that data driven, to be honest. I'm more hand to hand combat. I start with the person, not with the data set, for better or worse. So with that, I ended up getting a nursing major out of college. I had a roommate whose dad ran the ER in Gary, Indiana. So we saw a lot of action. I thought, oh, that's cool. It's not nurses doing all the kind of girly stuff. Oh, you can be involved in like warfare types, stab shootings. That sounds cool. So I got a
Right.
degree in nursing, moved to Chicago, grew up in Illinois, small town kid, 8,000 people in my hometown. Very myopic way of looking at the world. I knew I wanted to get to the city, so moved to Chicago. Actually ended up working at a children's hospital, and I worked on every floor, which I dug. So I tons of variety, getting to work with also the opportunity with kids. Obviously, it's a heroic effort to save a kid's life. A kid never deserved anything. If you got some like 85-year-old that's got emphysema and they smoke for 70 years, welcome to the future that you planned. But for a kid, they never deserve anything. So you ought to save a kid's life. And you get to work with a family, which is very complex and very interesting to me. Tons of chaos. In some situations, a mom and a dad. Mom's usually hysteric. Dad's usually angry and shut down. And getting them to the conversation was always a glorious challenge for me. I loved it. I would always ask for the toughest families just because, I don't know, as my grandfather would say, I'm glutton for punishment. But I also just liked that challenge of getting folks beyond their fears and concerns and getting them to deal with reality in a way that opens up the biggest possibility for them, which would become a theme for my life. So did that for a while, come from a faith background, was service in a local faith community church setting in Chicago. Caught wind of a guy named Erwin McManus who was I was on a team in India serving, and while I was there, they gave us a CD. Remember those? Gave us a CD of one of his talks, like sermons or TED Talky type things, and he had the music. He was saying things about faith that I'd wish somebody had been saying my whole life, because it was about risk and it was about really giving yourself to the world and being out there to redeem humanity and be a part of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not being about judgment, about being right, which is what most people of faith are like. This is about loving first and loving absolutely. And anyway, so I was compelled. That brought me out to LA, and I was an intern at this church called Mosaic, we called ourselves the research and development arm of Christianity. So we were very conservative people, did not like us, and we were like inclusive before that was a political statement. We were just into people and thinking we're a part of this grand narrative that there's purpose to the universe, there's love in the universe, and whatever people aren't experiencing, it's between their ears and in their heart. So if we provide an opportunity where people can open up, great things can happen. And in the meantime, go serve and make the world a better place. So I organized all of our volunteer world, which is we had about 3,000 people in the church. So about 2,000 of them every year would go out and serve in the community. So I knew that I could take the toughest, most shut down, cynical person and take them down to Skid Row and have them meet a couple people, and they would all immediately become grateful and open their lives up. or mentoring a homeless youth, or building a house with Habitat for Humanity. Service changes the human soul. I think it just aligns it, right? So, because I think the humans, I'm weird, and we don't have to get into it, but I think the human soul is made for connection and made for love. And then life happens, and we all get our armor on and decide to go survive instead of thrive. But I loved that opportunity to get to take people into the streets in LA. And then I took tons of teams overseas. So spent my 30s, late 20s, all my 30s mobilizing volunteers to have breathtaking experiences and help the world become a better place. I love that. Moved into, I met a guy whose father was a billionaire, so he's a millionaire. He wanted to give his money away, and I was the guy that knew everybody, and I was the guy that met him and helped him in his own spiritual path. So he asked me to help him give his money away. I took him around the world. He ended up actually being most connected to wanting to help people who had really blown it get a second chance. Long story very short, we
Yeah.
worked in the prison system. I met a guy who'd been doing this type of leadership work we're doing now as a full-time job, but on the side was also doing gang intervention work and work with juveniles in prison at such a level that recidivism, the chance that someone's going to go back to prison after getting out, the average is 87%. If you go through his simple 3-day program, they track these people over time. Over the last 20 years, they've tracked them. That number goes from 87% down to 12. So breathtaking
Amazing.
results. And I loved this guy. I've always been drawn towards leaders, to this, like, the leadership student. I was always both. I was always a leader, didn't think about it, was just what happened. And I liked it. Not like it was an accident either. I liked it because I knew leaders change the world. If you want to change the world, you better lead. Otherwise, whatever, just wait, because somebody else is going to change it, and you'll just have to live with that. And when I've always found mentors, and this guy Dan was my next mentor, so I could just see him move a room. He's world class, probably the best in the world at our types of trainings. He says there's one guy better than him, but I don't believe him. And so I did that work for several years, and then I got out and I went through all the trainings because I'm a sucker for self development type work, and I go to all these workshops and seminars, and I just love all that. I'm eager for it. I know that if I'm building myself, my world gets better. Internally, my world gets better, and externally, I can make a better difference with other people. Got out and I started coaching people on my own. Took on a business partner. We had a run for a while. Got back on my own, and then that guy Dan Tacchini, the one I followed into prison, who I say he's, if Mother Teresa and Yoda and Tony Soprano had a baby, that's Dan Tacchini. He's an interesting cat. He's a one of a kind. I started this business with him, Take New Ground, that we have now, probably 7 years ago, and it's guns blazing, man. We love it. He's almost 70 and I'm 43, and we're a great dynamic duo. Just took on another senior partner. I've got a team of about 10 people. We get to work with fantastic companies, and we are known for our very no bullshit approach. So if people like the coaching industries, usually about inspiration and education, no, we're about conviction, and we're about choices, and we're about personal responsibility. So we're not for everyone, but for people that like that, and most type A people like our approach, they roll their eyes at the sunshine and rainbow stuff. We're the smelling salts for these teams, and we get to have a lot of fun. So that's a little bit
What
of my journey.
I love it. There's probably too much to unpack there, but let me start here. What's the business proposition for you and your partners when you go into a company, offer your services? What are you telling them that they're going to get in return for bringing you guys in?
We're going to talk about what results they've given up on. So we talk about the future first, like what are the key results? And usually it's very foggy, and it's usually very circumstantial. And we believe that a person with a vision can never be held hostage by circumstance. There's always, when you put two humans in a room, it's already complicated because you get two worldviews, two sets of beliefs, two sets of values, two different approaches. There's all that. And you put 12 people on a leadership team, it's unendingly complex. And
Right.
most leaders, especially ambitious, driven leaders with opinions, don't listen very well. And so the potential of teaming goes way down based on the mindset of the person that's in the room. The opportunity for alignment and the opportunity to generate resilience on the team, which is to take on challenges on purpose for the sake of growth, that's always way below what I can get them to, what we can get them to. And that always happens in conversations. New results, number one, unprecedented results. Something new can happen they don't think can happen. I know it can happen. Alignment of the team beyond their personalities. Most people think because Tom is this way, he will never fill in the blank, or because Susie is this way, she will never fill in the blank. We can always break that up pretty quickly. And then to generate a conversation internally, which most people aren't in, let alone most teams aren't in, is a conversation about self-mastery. How well do I know myself based on results, which is distinct from knowing myself based on my story about myself. Most people know themselves, quote unquote, and they just know what they tell themselves. And a lot of that is full of despair. If I'm a certain way and I think it's my parents' fault or whatever the therapist taught us or Freud taught us, then we're stuck and we just got to make the best of a shitty situation. And we don't approach it that way. We're Adlerian. I say you are what you're committed to. You're not the sum of your past. Most people unconsciously think I am because that happened instead of I am what I'm committed to. So there's a lot of power there. And if you get people into a
Mhm.
self-mastery conversation, there's no challenge too difficult to be worked through at all. There's How good could we get is an unanswerable question, meaning we don't know how good we could get. We don't know how effective we could be. That's a fun journey. Most people are just trying to get their job done and go home instead of,
Mhm.
oh, work is the context of meaning for me. And I am on my own path of I can have unlimited amount of meaning and connection with these people that up until we talked to them, they were just tolerating. So in those realms is what is the proposition.
So you said something really interesting that I have also found to be true early on in your response, and that is that you believe that people who are highly driven, sort of type A leaders, are typically not good listeners. Can they be
Yeah.
taught to listen?
Yeah. Yes. It's
I,
never.
and how's that transformation happen?
Yeah. Yes, they can easily be taught. The harder thing, because it's not hard to listen, it's just a risk for them. So it's more, are they willing to listen? Not can they? And the way you have to do that is you have to lay out a parade of horribles. We call it a parade of horribles. So let's say just last week, I was in a room with 5 leaders of a private equity firm here in town in Los Angeles. And there's an old man that started the whole firm. Then it's a little bit complicated. Let's see if I can do it verbally. Then there's a group of 3 of them that have been there for 25 years. Then there's a new guy who's been there 7 years. The old man is just kind of Mr. Rogers in the corner, doesn't speak his mind very much, is very successful, has raised billions of dollars, but I'm retired. I don't want to get in these guys' way. That's the story he's in. The group of 3, 2 of the 3 are in a camp with the old man. Then there's the one that's with the group of 3, and it's his buddy that he hired 7 years ago. The guy, they're at an impasse because the new guy wants to be equals with the rest of them financially. And that would be unprecedented. They've never done that before. They're in this, you got to be here a long time before you become equals, but he's going to leave. If he doesn't become equals, he's going to leave. He brought in 40% of the yield from the previous fund. So he's the
Mhm.
rock star investor of the group, and he's asking to be made equals. There's resistance in the room. They don't want to do that. Now, so how do I help these type A people listen? I got to paint the picture about what's going to happen if they don't. In this situation, the new guy is going to go. And if he goes, it's over. They're about to raise another fund, and he's a major part of their marketing of the new fund. If he leaves, there's no new fund. And if there's no new fund, there's no business. They'll manage the rest of their funds and the rest of their portfolio companies, but there's no possibility. And so income's going to go from, these guys make a lot of money, go from a high level of money down to nothing, or down to like normal money for
Right.
everyday people. So they don't want to listen until they see hell that's on its way. And then it makes sense to them to listen. And they don't trust it either, because usually people are listening from their own dogmatic view, and they're listening. This is just what our brain does. We're listening to prove something. So you know what it's like. I know what this is like all the time. I have an opinion about you and what you're up to, and I'm going to listen to you just to confirm my own opinion. One of those cognitive biases. So I'm only paying attention to what you're saying that agrees with my judgment of you. That's just gravity for the human mind. If it takes work, and we do this usually with a baseball bat in hand, is, hey, why don't you listen for what you think is not true? Listen for that. What are they saying that makes sense, even though you are sure they're an idiot? Why don't you listen to what makes sense and how they are similar to you, instead of your agenda, which is to prove how they're not like you and how you're better than them? So You got to get clear on what the cost is if they keep doing what they've been doing. And then it does take a little bit of nuance. We have a very our type of inquiry is very Socratic in this way. It's like more
Hmm.
wondering and trying on different ideas and seeing what opens up for us, see what possibilities pop up if I'm willing to entertain the thing I've been unwilling to entertain up until now. But if one of those shifts happens, especially in a room of, let's say, 5, if the ringleader, which in that room this happened, the ringleader in the room, the guy that has the most influence in the room, he was the most engaged. And his type of engagement opened up everybody else. They came out of their caves and came to play. And it was messy. It was really messy. And it's great. We don't mind the mess. It usually needs to get messier before it gets cleaner. So I approach it like that. I hope that answer made sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely made sense. It strikes me that the methodology that you're describing requires a ton of investment in understanding. I call it the human psyche. I'm not sure the human position, the
Sure.
human journey,
Sure.
however you want to describe it. What
Right.
got you interested in that in particular? Because it strikes me that you not only in order to do what you just described, you have to be vested in that human journey process. You got to be super interested in it, like you
Yeah.
as just a pursuit of your own. When did that start
Yeah.
for you, and what did that look like?
It started early for me. And this is a little bit why when I was a kid, they always say you're an old soul. In my family, I was the odd duck. I was like the not the black sheep necessarily, but I was just the one that didn't fit, mostly because
Hmm.
I had lots of questions. I wanted to know how things worked. And can we turn off classically in my head is can we turn off the TV and just talk at dinner? Because I want to talk. I want to understand. I want to talk about relationships. I want to talk about school. I really wanted to talk about things, really to understand why. Because I was successful. I'm externally quarterback of the team, student council, smart kid, blah blah blah. But internally, I was anxious and I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I looked comfortable. If you met me, you'd say, "Oh, Adrian, he's got his shit together. He's exemplary, blah blah blah." But internally, I was uncomfortable, and I wanted to
Is
become
that
uncomfortable. Sorry, I wanted to
is
become
that from
comfortable.
not knowing, or is it from a desire to just absorb knowledge?
Probably both. Probably both. I just heard a research study the other day that 40% of humans don't realize they're in an internal dialogue, which is baffling to me because I've been aware of my internal dialogue, i.e., I'm talking
Hmm.
to myself all the time via thinking since I was whatever, young kid, and I was
Right.
conscious of that. And some people just float through life just like living, and they don't realize that their thought life creates their experience. So I was conscious of that, and I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to feel engaged. I wanted to make the biggest difference as well. And I knew that like I had a hunch that how I was thinking about things really created what I call life. And we know that's true. We actually have a perception in our people. We say it this way. It came from a guy named Dave Logan. First, there's a book called Three Laws of Performance. If your listeners haven't read it, it's worth listening to.
Hmm.
Three Laws of Performance by Dave Logan. People react to the world the way the world occurs to them. Number one. Number two is the world happens for us in language. Number three is future based language creates present state. It seems like you and I are on this podcast together, like the same podcast, but we're not. You are on your version in your mind. I'm on my version in
Hmm.
my mind. We have different sets of interests here. I'm here trying to think about how can I generate the most value for I want to connect with you. I want to create the most value for your listeners. I know you're doing the same thing, but you're also listening from your history, from who you are, from what you already think about me just in this short engagement. We all make these assumptions and based on our
Right.
biases, and some of those will be probably open up possibilities for the conversation. Maybe some of your biases shut down. You have to overcome them to be able to be here and ask these questions. So we're on two different podcasts. It seems like we're in the same one. So the long story really short is I was aware of that and I wanted to think to your second point, get more information. How do other people see this same moment than I do? Because I think I could learn if I could see it through their lenses. And that's part of what keeps me in the game and why if I'm in a room that's even full of major conflict like I was in the story I told you, it's
Yeah.
fascinating to me. And I know that it's their thinking that's causing the suffering. It's not what's happening. It's their thinking. Always gets back to their conscious thoughts. And even more than that, gets to what's invisible for them. And if I can illuminate the invisibility of like kind of the baseline unchecked assumptions that they see everything through, For example, they might say people can't be trusted. That's a that's a that belief shapes everything. Or people have my best interest. You could do the opposite. They're always, and
Hmm.
that's also can shape your belief in how you show up, what you say, what you don't say. Both of them are really naive. And it's both. And you better listen to see where the other person is. Eh,
So, what's your position on whether or not people are? I have to ask this based upon what you just said. Are people
Yeah.
inclined to do good, and by good for others, rather than just their own interest, from your perspective?
Yeah. The answer that's not that satisfying is it is both. I think back to what I was saying earlier about the human soul, I think we all want the same thing. We all want to be seen. We all want to know ourselves. We all want to be accepted, and we all want to be championed. I think that's human 101. I think we're crafted that
Hmm.
way. For me, that's a spiritual conversation, but I think we're all that way at a core level. But life teaches us other things. We get betrayed, we get lied to, we get used, we get all those things happen. And so a lot of us live our lives in response to the things that we didn't want or didn't like. And we just call that playing not to lose. So I know what losing feels like. I don't want to do that. So I'm actually listening from that mindset where the threats and even possibilities show up as threats instead of playing to win, which is I know who I am and I'm willing to give to get. The old golden rule is always the best idea is go ahead and whatever you're looking for in a room, give that to the room and see what happens. And the chance of getting what you want goes way up. Yes, people are naturally inclined, I would say, to give because it works. First off, it works in reality. Second off, you feel better about yourself. But we've trained ourselves to give the least amount we can and not take risks. So it's both and. But I try to get people into my work is to get people into a generous mindset because that
Hmm.
will shift the room.
What's the most difficult part of leadership for people? And let me provide some context to this.
Sure.
I think that there's not a ton of good leadership present in the enterprise space. And by enterprise, I just mean, I'll say corporate
Big
environments.
companies. Yeah.
Yeah, big companies. Why are people so bad at it? Why is leadership so tough?
To do leadership well, you must be vulnerable. And the human brain is apt to not be vulnerable. It wants to survive. Number one, that's the number one
Hmm.
pursuit of the human brain is survival. Number two is save energy so I can survive later. And when I say survival, it's not watch out for the bus and watch out for the tiger, not that type of survival. It's more ego survival. So we talk about looking good, feeling good, being right, being in control. Those are the core survival needs. Those are going on in everybody's mind at every single moment of the day. They might be a low level, right? They might be like a 1 out of 10 volume. For some people that you've met and I've met, they're at a 10 out of 10. That's the only thing they care about. So, in order to lead, you must be vulnerable and know these tendencies and know that you're speaking into those tendencies when you're leading. And so, it requires a level of boldness and a level of trust in humanity and trust really in yourself that I can say what needs to be said. And even if we take on challenges and conflict because of that, it's good. We need to have this conflict. Most people would rather just look good and feel good and be right and be in control and then take whatever results they can get while preserving themselves. So I know when I'm around a leader that seems to say whatever, I always say current reality is always looking for a spokesperson. And a great leader is willing to put language to what's happening and willing to call people up beyond the way they're showing. We're in such a pandering culture these days, at least in my view. And there's so many things we can't talk about because everybody's going to be offended and all that bullshit. And so people end up following the rules of society instead of setting the bar themselves. And that's a risk. So I think that's the biggest challenge is people willing to die for the sake of a cause. Most people aren't.
What role do things like character and integrity play in a person's ability to lead? And by the way, I love your call out that the willingness to be vulnerable, I think, is a precursor to opening the door to lots of leadership possibilities. But like when people bring what they already have to the table, whatever their level of character is, whatever their level of integrity is, like what role do those traditional principles play in their ability to be good leaders?
It's everything over time. You can be a charlatan. You cannot have You can not be honest. You can not have integrity, not have perseverance, not have all those ethics. And that can work for a short amount of time. You can fake people out. But over a long enough timeline, everybody gets found out. Every lie is revealed over time, I say.
Mhm.
So if I don't have integrity, which for me, it just means wholeness, it's not perfection. A lot of people think integrity is about
Yeah.
doing the right thing, saying the right thing all the time. I'm not in that camp just because I know myself and I know all the psychology around. We all have a dark side. We all have
Mhm.
criminality to us. We all want to lie and cheat and steal. We've all done that at a certain time on some level. And so for me, integrity is integrating all of my glory and all of my dark side. And ironically, if people can integrate all that and share about it in a responsible way, trust goes up. Even if I share something from my past where I lied to somebody or betrayed somebody, if I'm responsible, people lean in and get closer. They're like, oh, this guy's a real deal. He's not running a con on me. Yeah, there's a story that came to mind. I won't tell it for the sake of time. But over time, your integrity and your character is going to be found out. And so if you're going to start somewhere, my advice to most people that are struggling personally and struggling corporately, get your own house in order first. Get yourself straight, then help the people closest to you, then work yourself out. Don't try to put on a game and build up this big image and help other people, because otherwise you'll be shallow and even if you're successful, you'll fail because you can't handle it because it's
All right.
not aligned, it's inauthentic.
Put your own mask on first before you start to help others.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Okay.
The old Christian thing about like seeing the plank in somebody else's eye. That's You've got your own plank. Figure that out first before you start judging other people.
You had indicated early on that part of who you are is based on faith and what that's done to help shape who you are. Some of the principles that you described appear to me to have some influence from maybe Eastern philosophy. Is that accurate, or am I misreading some of what you described? And if it is there, how have you incorporated that Eastern philosophy into your thoughts around leadership?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I could see how that would make sense. Let's see. So Christianity today is very philosophically distinct from Christianity and its origins, I would say. Because
Mhm.
even like modern Christianity is very westernized, which is more linear, answers driven. Here's the process, here's the steps, just do all these steps. That's a Western idea. That's not a Christian idea. Christianity has always been open to inquiry. And I mean, you can even tell if you just read the parts of the Bible per se about when Jesus is speaking, he's speaking philosophically most of the time. It's not about the answers. It's about who we become as we, what's the word I'm looking for? Incarnate the questions. As I live in this question, he's even all of his parables, it's not about answers, it's about a story, and how do you find yourself in this story. And you could actually, if you
Mhm.
looked at the story, you could be all different characters, and we are all different characters in the story. We tend to put ourselves in the hero place because we're ego driven people, but if we could also become the villain in the story and think, how do I relate to that villain? Yes, most Eastern religions are more inquiry based and more stoic in that way, which I'm into because it opens up the biggest possibility, because it generates a whole mood of discovery. And so we're not just trying to find what the answer that I think I'm looking for. We might find a deeper question that opens up or makes that previous answer worth nothing compared to how I am in the question. That's a very weird answer to that. But I'm a mix of both. People that want to convince me that it's some kind of 5-step process, I'm not that guy. And I would assert and prove it 10 ways how that's not actually true. It's just naive to think that the formula of yesterday will solve the problem of tomorrow. And if we're open to new questions and new ways of being, I can meet tomorrow's challenges, but I have to break off from the dogmatism and the commitment of yesterday.
You told a fascinating story earlier about a room and the different personalities and how they engaged in the process and what you were responsible for doing in order to get the thoughts moving in a particular direction. What's the toughest room that you've ever gone into? Was that the story, or is there one that you just thought from the onset, after understanding what the problem set is, you say to yourself, "Wow, we might not succeed here."
Yeah. Yeah. A story, let's see, I can do it without names. I was working with a company that has world renowned fame, and they're in the security business,
Hmm.
and all of them are top tier practitioners. Some of them the smart guys, NSA, CIA guys, some of them Rangers, SEALs, all that. And there's two different sides of the business. There's the intellectual side of the business and around strategic planning for security, both for famous people and also for their company, and so also for their businesses. That was a tough room because anybody that's used to being the smartest person in the room and used to not being questioned doesn't like me that much because I'm going to question everything. And especially in that type of top down environment, they're used to, you can't ask me that question unless you're at my level. And I'm the new guy walking in. And it was a tough room just because those folks trade in power. And I'm not that religious about their power struggles and who's triangulated with who and who thinks who and why is this person. They're all godfatherish. It's like a little bit like the mafia. So that was a tough room. That was a tough room to be in. And we spent 2 days with them and stepped on some landmines early. And we needed to go a lot slower because those folks don't trust anybody unless they respect them. And we assumed a little more respect than we had. And a lot of it's also, it was a big firm now, but it was like a mom and pop shop. So it's, if you've been there a long time, you've got some special credibility and you might even own part of the company. And there's all these tons of nuances about how the power showed up in the room and who gets to listen, who speaks, who listens, in what order, that kind of stuff. And that was a really tough room. That was a really tough room. We learned a lot. I'll just say we learned a lot because we messed it up pretty early and got in a lot of conflict that we didn't know how to get out of. Out of that, half the room was very excited about working forward. When the folks that we had offended by me not caring about who they were and where they came from, I'm more caring about results and how they're showing up in this moment in time. Those folks, they don't want to learn from anybody, including me. Those whenever we get in those rooms, and in some ways, just honestly, we missed it. We learn a ton from those. People call those failures, but man, their learning opportunities are so good.
Yeah, they tend to stick with you. What kind of
Yeah.
prep do you guys do? What kind of prep do you do as a team before you go into space? What's valuable in the way of understanding the dynamics to the degree that you can before you even get into space?
Sure. We use a leadership assessment tool called the Harrison Assessment. It's, I think, the most honest and helpful tool out there. There's lots of assessments, and I've been training a dozen
Hmm.
of them. This one's distinct. It's, first off, nobody knows it. Nobody's taken it before because there's only 150 of us in the States that have access to it. But what I like most about it is it reveals, first off, it's gauged on people's preferences, not their personality. There's no tie between personality and performance. There is a distinct tie in the data between someone's preferences and their performance. What do they like doing?
Interesting.
So, insofar that if someone's spending 70% of their time doing what they prefer doing, they have an increased chance of success of 300 to 400%. So, pretty big deal. Most of us don't have language for it, though. I'm busy being Adrian. And so I'm not thinking about what aspects of my work align with the things that get me most excited, things that come to my awareness most quickly, things I'm prone to take action towards. And I haven't taken on the personal authority and agency to craft my world around my preferences, which is the best strategy. Not that you can avoid the things that you don't like doing. You can just delegate those responsibly or do them in sprints instead of doing them more often. We put people through that assessment and then we debrief them on that assessment before we get in the room. So we have a good sense of where people are. And then we put together all those findings into a culture map, we call it. So we'll show where people are at rest, because it'll show in these 12 paradoxes where they are at rest and then where they go under stress. And so we can know in the room what the major tendencies are. They might be nice people, but they go to dogmatic. They might be really open, they go to dogmatic. They might be very serving of others, they go to dominating. These are some of the common flips under stress. And we naturally generate some stress in the room because that gets their resistance to the table. We're not there to add some kind of insight to their current thinking. We're there to challenge their thinking that gets them to the spot that they are. So we'll of course sit down with the major stakeholders and talk about the outcomes that they want to get out of the 2 days together or 3 days together, however long we're with them. And then also really get into what are the apparent challenges. And then usually the apparent challenges are only symptoms. So what's causing the challenges? So we want to get down to the causal issues. And it's almost always relational, period. No matter what you're up to, it's how people are relating to themselves, how they're relating to others, how they're relating to the work itself. It's always
Hmm.
relational in that way. So we know that. Most people think it's strategic and it's about the plan. It's not that. It's about the thinking that generated the plan, which always gets back to human being. So we do that type of work. I'll sometimes have special time with key stakeholders. If I know there's a heavy in the room that's got a lot of authority, I want to respect that person because I need them in the room, because if they shift, everybody shifts. So I'll spend some special time around them and build some camaraderie with them before we jump in the room, so they feel like it's their training as well. They get to influence it. They get to take it where it's not like I'm the guy that's out there running it. No, this is your training to get done what you want to get done. I'm here to challenge things, provide new perspective on things. Usually what's necessary is getting the conversations that are under the table on the table. In every culture, there's conversations under the table, just things we don't talk about, things you don't dare say, sacred cows, whatever you want to call them. Our
Yeah,
job is usually get those conversations on the table so we can actually deal with them instead of them running us.
super interesting. Are there environments, maybe industry or business verticals that you've been exposed to where performance is not directly tied to the quality of leadership within the company? In other words, performance seems to be high accomplishment, but the leadership is marginal at best. And I'm asking this question for a very specific reason, because I have an industry in mind where I've seen many examples of this. And it strikes me as just, I don't know if it's an anomaly or it's very specific to this particular industry, but have you seen that high performance, poor leadership?
Sure. I see it all the time. We've worked with plenty of tech companies and plenty of engineering companies where, especially in those worlds, people are leading because they're the best at a certain thing. So, and they get promoted because they're the smartest one, or they're where we work with a company now, an aerospace company, and
Yeah.
they all come from the biggest aerospace company on the planet. The guy that runs this company was the number one employee at that biggest aerospace company on the planet, and he's the CEO. Why? Because he's the name, but he doesn't want to be the CEO. He doesn't like running anything. He doesn't like coming out of his office. So
Hmm.
there's not going to be great leadership because he doesn't want to be a leader. He just wants to make cool shit. They make rockets and he just
Yeah.
wants to make cool shit. We just did an offsite with them and we finally got a cancerous guy out of there. But it's the conversation they've been dying to have for months. And when you get us in the room, things are going to move quickly. We're like a laxative. And in some ways, I've never used that quite as a metaphor, but that's true. Bring us in the room, shit's going to move.
You get
So
stuff moving.
you get stuff moving. So yeah, you get enough smart people together, they're going to get lucky, even if they're not teaming really well. Somebody's going to take over and somebody's going to lead with their expertise. So we've seen that just from my own work, is especially we worked with tons of engineering companies and tons of tech companies.
Does that mean
What
that
industries
those
did you have in
team
mind?
tech in particular
Yep.
has been
Yep.
my observation? And I'm wondering, is it fair to say then that with the application of good leadership plus those smart, talented folks, that performance could be even higher? Or is that
Oh
a
yeah.
illogical assumption?
Oh no, for sure. And when I say leadership, I don't know what you mean by that. For me, mostly great leadership is clarity about the future, conviction about the
Hmm.
future, sober ownership of current reality. If you pull those two things off and a leader's willing to speak the future that they're committed to, speak what's happening right now that's working, what's not working, and what's missing, if you just do that, the whole thing's going to work a lot better. But most people don't want to do one of those two things. Most people are decently clear about the future, but there's conflict if we get clear on what's not working now. And it's if you don't don't generate a culture of personal responsibility, then you can't have any accountability. You can punish people and generate fear, but people aren't going to be accountable to themselves and to others, which is the only real form of accountability. You could babysit people all day long, but most leaders hate their lives when they've created a culture of babysitting, which they do
Yeah.
just because they're not willing to talk about issues when they're small. They wait until they become big, and then they have to sit at the shit buffet instead of eating the shit hors d'oeuvre that they were offered a long time ago.
I guess when I mention the term leadership and use it in a quick fashion like that, I'm immediately thinking about a people centered type of leadership where the
Yeah.
quality of lives of the people that you lead and their growth, their involvement is at the very least part of the one or two punches that you need to exercise. Like it's part of your daily exercise to make sure that they're growing, they're developing, that their wellness is a component of your leadership. So those are the
Yep.
types of things that I'm pointing to that I don't know that
Sure.
they are priorities, at least as I've observed them.
No, they're usually not. They're usually not a priority. Most people in this day and age feel really busy. They love to feel busy. And most, especially if you're dealing with men, in my experience, men are
Yeah.
just more object oriented. They're not as people oriented as a whole. We know that from the science that men are into stuff, women are into people as a whole. There's men that show up and care about people. There's women that are just very driven and want to get something built or whatever. Those are the outliers, though. There's not the normal. So
Yeah.
if a man is leading a company, they want to talk about objective things. They don't want to talk about, even we patronize and we call it soft skills, like all these soft skills, which obviously has judgments baked into it because it's soft and not hard and all that. But I call all of those things vital competencies, like the ability to listen, the ability to, speak in a way that enrolls people, the ability to influence other people in a way that's not coercive, but actually is magnetic. Those are all the soft skills. Those are vital competencies. But you can go take a class about that, but you don't learn about that in a book. You have to actually learn that on the field of play. And since most of us have a pretty flattering view of ourselves, we don't want to get any feedback either. So we don't, even if it's eating our lunch, we don't want to put ourselves through the grinder and figure out what's working and not working from me. It's pretty rare. When I meet people, when I like clients, for example, they are really right about what's happening and they haven't asked many questions. They're definitely not willing to, most of them for the most part, aren't willing to take on the humility and take on themselves first, like that self-mastery conversation. That takes a lot of risk, because that's the biggest reward. If they're willing to make the change in themselves that they want to see in the world, as Gandhi said or whatever, that'll make the big difference. But yeah, most people want to shift things instead of shift themselves.
Uh, Adrian Koehler, this has been an absolutely awesome conversation. I've had only a handful of guests, I think, where I felt like during the conversation that probably could have gone on for much, much longer than
I know,
than the
man.
plan, and this is one of them. So I feel like I'm almost cutting it off short. Definitely, some of the concepts that you highlight and the way that I think you've crafted the subject definitely resonates with me, as I think it will some of my listeners. Where
Hmm.
can folks find you? Where are you in the space? Books,
Sure.
lectures, engagements? What's that look like when you're in?
Right on. And I'll just start by saying same. I'm here. We've run out of time. I'm like, oh, we're just getting
Yeah,
started. We could talk for another three
yeah,
hours.
I feel like
At least for us. I don't know if the listeners, they
yeah,
probably trail off.
yeah.
But anyway, this has been fun for me too. So thank you, man. Thanks for your integrity and your intellection and all that's really compelling. How you find me? If you want to find me on social media, Adrian.K is my Instagram handle, and I'm usually posting stuff like this, conversations I'm having with leaders or on podcasts. You can check that out. If you want to find us online, takenewground.com. We've got, obviously, if you run a big company, if you run a division inside of a company, if you run your own company, love to have a conversation with you and just see if there's ways in which we could help you. You can just reach out to me via the website or on Instagram, or Adrian at takenewground.com. So we do most of our work's in-house, retainer work with people, and we solve serious problems in a short amount of time. We also do these public trainings. One's called the Revenant Process. It's a 4-day, you'd love it, 4-day deep dive, personal leadership, integrity, commitment, legacy, all those. We do that in 4 days, a big, long experience for people. You clean up a lot of the past, you get people really clean and clear about the future, and it's a huge breakthrough for them. We've got another one coming out, depending on if this drops in early June. We've got an event late June in Hawaii. Our next one, we just did one in LA. We just did one in Boise before that. We'll do another one in the fall. By the time we're rehashing the website now, so it'll be takenewground.com/revenant. But if you message me and you're interested in that, just hit me on Instagram and I'll send you all the info. Then we're just here to help people come alive and make the most. We only got one trip around the bases here, so you might as well make the most of it.
Outstanding. Hey, Adrian, I appreciate the conversation and thanks for being
Of
in
course.
the studio. All right,
Yeah,
folks,
thank you,
that's it for
brother.
this
Good to
episode
be
of
with
the
you.
Leadership Student Podcast. Fascinating conversation with my guest, Adrian Koehler. Thanks, and we'll see you guys the next time around.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Leadership Student Podcast with MK Palmore, part of the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then add this show to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to the ITSP Magazine YouTube channel, and share the ITSP Magazine Podcast Network with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to connect your brand to our conversations and our audience, visit itspmagazine.com to learn how to sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey.